Hey, my name is Cassandra Adams. I am from Jersey City, New Jersey, and I'm a late discovery donor conceived adult. And my story has been almost 8 years in the making as of right now. I took a DNA test is what started all this, which I'm sure is what happens in a lot of the situations that you've discussed on the podcast so far. But I took a 23andMe test in 2017. Took the test in August, got my results in September, and I got a very big surprise when I got my results. So kind of the background of, my life is I was raised by a mom and a dad, never questioned that they were my biological parents, never questioned there was anything unique about my family structure. Um, and I was always very much the family, genealogist, the budding family historian. I asked the questions. My mom is Italian American. My grandparents are from Italy. My mom was conceived in Italy and brought over to the US when she was in utero and born in Brooklyn, New York. And so that was a part of my family and a part of our history that I was always very, very connected to. Grew up in a house where Italian was spoken, and my grandfather was kind of the family historian on that side and kind of always pulled me aside to talk to me about, the family history or the history of the village that we came from and all of this stuff. And it just really trickled down where that became something that was really important to me, important to my identity, important for me to carry on. And so that was kind of contrasted with my dad's side. My dad's family was a lot smaller, not as close to extended family, and not really connected to any kind of culture or narrative that they would really talk about. I remember asking from a very early age, whether it was because I had some inkling that there was something missing in my life, or whether it was because my mom's family was there was so much recent immigration, kind of inundated with culture, that I felt from that side, and I didn't get that from my dad's side, that I kind of questioned it. I would ask my dad, like, well, what are we? Like, where did grandma and pop come from? Like, and the most I got was, I don't know, something about Dutch, like, and nobody really knew. And so when I was in my teens, got a subscription to Ancestry and started looking at census results and found that one of my dad's cousins was really into genealogy. So reached out to him and did that. And it actually gave me a little bit of feeling of a little bit of a connection there. Most of his family were, you know, early colonial settlers from the Netherlands, some of the first settlers in New Amsterdam, what's now Brooklyn, and some Puritans in Massachusetts and that kind of stuff. So that was really cool. But I kind of, yeah, I kind of felt like I was searching for things on that side very early in my life. And so when I took this DNA test, I was hoping that it would kind of connect me with maybe some family members, that it would give me a little bit more of a cultural breakdown on my dad's side, and also health information. That was actually the impetus behind when I took the test, was that I qualified for a research study through 23andMe, and that was really great because I had always wanted to do one of these DNA tests. They were used to be cost prohibitive, $400, and what kid in their, early 20s has $400? And so by the time this came around and I got it for free, it was great. So yeah, spit into the tube. I remember being in the room with my mom when I spit into the tube, and she kind of had a sick look on her face. I didn't really think anything of it, but looking back, I remember that. And on September 26th of 2017, I got an email in the at night. My daughter was 19 months old. She had just fallen asleep and decided to pull out my phone for one more check of my email. A friend of mine had just had a baby, so I was like, oh, maybe she sent some photos or something, you know. Um, and I saw that my results were in. So I opened it up, and the first thing that I saw was 49 something percent Ashkenazi Jewish. And I thought, wow, okay. First thought being, because you don't think anything is amiss right away, you try to make sense of it. So my first thought was, oh, my no-no, my grandfather. When they came from Italy, they lived in the section of Brooklyn. It was all Jews and all Italians. And my grandfather would, have these little sayings that he said that he picked up from his Jewish neighbors. But I don't know, maybe they were actually ethnically Jewish, and I don't know. So I sent my mom a message. I said, "Mommy, you've got to take this test. I think maybe we're part Jewish, and this would be really cool. You need to take it." And she kind of sent me the little thumbs up sign. Um, and then the night went on, and I was just kind of looking through these results, still kind of puzzled, because I was like, well, this is like 50%. And then there's Italian in there. And at the time, before they refine results, things are a little bit more mixed. It was like 20, something percent Italian, and then there was some Middle Eastern, and then there was 4% French and 4% Spanish. And eventually they consolidated that to, 100% or 50% Italian. But at the time it was a little mixed. So I'm looking, and I was convinced that like 4% French or whatever the heck it was, I was like convinced that was from my dad. His done some research. Like, I was born in New Rochelle, New York, and I had found that there was like one line of my dad's family that had like been some of like the founding families in New Rochelle, who were like from like Rochelle in France, like in like the 1700s or something. I was like, okay, that's where that came from. As the night wore on, I sent screenshots to some of my friends, and I was like, this, yeah, but something's off. Like, where's my no, yeah, where's my dad? Kind of, I mean, or this isn't what I expected, and eventually I still wasn't kind of putting it together. And I checked my matches, and I had a half sibling match, and I was like, oh, gosh, did my dad have a kid before? You know, all of this. I'm not sure what to make of it. And finally, it's like 4 in the morning, and I've been up for like several hours, just like looking and, kind of contemplating this and figuring other things. And my friend says to me, she's like, Cassandra, she's like, your last name is Adams. You've done this research. That like primarily your dad has like tons of British ancestry, or should. You have 0% British. There's nothing Northern European in your results at all. And that's when it hit. That's when it hit me. Because I was like, oh, it's not a matter of this is different than what I expected. It's a matter of he's not there at all.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So, and that's when I started to panic. And I, looked at my half sibling match, and she was also 50% Ashkenazi Jewish. And I messaged my mom again and asked, she was coming over the next morning to watch my daughter. I had an appointment. And so I asked her if she could come over a little bit early, and she was still awake. It was like, yeah, like 4 something in the morning, and she was still awake. And again, she sent me the little thumbs up sign. Yeah. So I really started to panic. and I didn't sleep the rest of the night for maybe like 20 minutes of slightly dozing off, but that was it. And as soon as the customer hotline opened up, I called and I asked if there was any possible way that there was a mix-up, that these were not my results. And they assured me that they had so many safeguards in place that there was no way there was a mix-up. These were my test results. And I'm like, because these are almost making it seem like my dad isn't related to me and that I didn't, and I think this was 2017. I think it was right before. I think 2017 and 2018 were like the biggest years so far for DNA testing. So there was a big, big boom of us finding out that parents were not our parents and all of this. And so I think they hadn't quite yet gotten the customer service people to, you know, kind of talk through this with people, like she just
Yeah.
was like, yeah, these are your results. These are all the safeguards we have in place. These are your results. And that was kind of it. There wasn't like, do you need help, figuring this out? Is there a reason? Are you, how are you feeling? What can we help you with? Nothing that I think they might be trained a little bit more on now, a little bit maybe. So yeah, so when my mom came over, I was like, "Mommy," she sat down on the couch and we only had like maybe 15 minutes to talk before I had to leave. And I said, "Mommy, what's going on? He's not my dad." And she started crying and she said, "No, he's not." And that's when it was really like you start to crumble. Like you feel your body crumbling. Like you
Yeah.
if you feel it physically. It's not just emotional, it's physical too. And I looked over at my daughter because my daughter, she was 19 months old. She was playing in the corner and I was like, what did I pass down? What, all of this. I said, "Mommy, what happened? That was something that I grew up, my mom's family was not religious. They were not, very they were nominally Catholic, but everybody's kind of agnostic. Like nobody was really, there's Virgin Mary pictures all over the place, but that's kind of the way,
Yeah.
But there wasn't a lot of, kind of dogma about it. But one thing that my mom and the family really valued was waiting till marriage. Like that was, you got to be a good Italian girl and you got to wait till you're married.
Sure.
So, so that
And
was
if I can interject quickly, sorry, I have one quick question.
yes.
So if as you're recalling
Yeah.
this, heavy moment with your mother, had donor conception crossed your mind at that point, or were you considering other possibilities beyond that?
Yeah, that's such a good question. And it's so hard because I kind of don't think it did.
Okay.
And it's funny too, because I feel like another friend of mine who's also very much into genealogy and was kind of helping me throughout the night and kind of process and figure this out. She even posted in like a Jewish genealogy group for me, like, somebody just popped up 50% surprised Jewish. What could be the secret? And everybody's, talking about, conversos and all this stuff. But
Hmm.
she even asked me, and I feel like maybe she had this idea, but she asked me, like, did your parents have problems having you? And I was like, well, yeah. But, there was always a story behind it. There was always the solution, how the story played out. My parents waited. They were married in 75. I was born in 82. But my husband and I waited a while to have kids too. Like we didn't even, 7 years was not like I asked about it when I was a kid, like, why did you and daddy wait so long? And, first thing she said was, we waited to buy a house. And that was a good answer. And it was true, that was
Hmm.
true.
Yeah.
And, and my husband and I, we waited to, buy a house. We wanted to travel. We didn't want to have kids really young. So we waited a while. So that, kind of didn't strike me. I did find out when I was in my early 20s I don't know how it came out, but that my dad did have a fertility problem, that he had low sperm count, and that he had a surgery to correct it, and then that they got pregnant with me very soon after.
Hmm.
And there was no question in my mind. That was the story kind of made sense. So I think when I realized that he wasn't my father, I was just, I don't know. I think maybe, something like her being violated might have crossed my mind even more, because she was so adamant that, you know, you wait till you're married, and I've never been with anybody else other than daddy. And like, he's the only person I've been with. Like, that was such a part of like my childhood and like my like growing up kind of thing,
Hmm.
that like I didn't even consider. I thought maybe so when I asked her, I was like, what happened? Thinking that maybe she'd been violated or something. Like, I didn't it almost couldn't almost unfathomable how it could have happened, you know? And then, she said that my dad couldn't have children. And then I kind of started to kind of question her about everything. I mean, my first thing was like, why didn't you tell, are you like, who is this person? Like, and eventually we kind of got into all the whole story that she had told me, which was that, and the crazy thing is that I realized that so much of what she told me was true, but she manipulated it in order to hide the real truth, which was
Hmm.
so, so, so frustrating, and almost felt more like a betrayal in a sense, because she had been so honest with me about, I felt like, so much. Like, my daughter right now is 9. I'm obviously I've had a lot of conversations with her growing up. She knows a lot of stuff. I told her I was doing a podcast right now about sperm donation, and she's like, "Oh, of course you are." She's like, "What else would you spend your time yapping about?" Like, she knows about all this stuff. But now that she's 9, I'm thinking of, starting to kind of expand the conversation a little bit more, because she's approaching puberty and all of that. So, when I look back at my relationship with my mom, I appreciate so much how open she was with so much about reproduction and all of this, that it almost shocked me more how she was able to continuously hide the truth. So that whole thing about her never having had sex with anybody other than my dad, it was true. She never had
Yeah.
sex. She was never intimate like that or had sex with anyone else other than my dad. And that was true. And she was able to hide the fact that she used a sperm donor based on repeating that to me. And I'm sure that, I'm sure she would have tried to instill that value in me regardless of like, oh, save yourself for your husband. But I mean, I almost feel like it was overemphasized in a sense to hide that, because it was such, and again, with my dad, like, he did have a surgery, and I found out again from talking to him after as well, you know, gave me his side as well. But my mom said, no, he really did have a surgery to correct something, but that didn't work. It didn't work. So that was not the problem. And
Hmm.
she even used a cousin of hers as kind of an example. A cousin of hers had the same issue. I guess there's this issue. I forget the medical name for it, but it's like there's a varicose vein in the testicles, and it can make the testicles too hot. It,
Hmm.
makes the temperature too hot, so it kills off sperm. So it can result in a low
Okay.
sperm count. So apparently this is like a fairly common-ish thing, where then they remove this varicose vein, normalizes the temperature in the testicles, and sperm count goes up, and so this is the story of what worked for my dad, and it worked for my mom's cousin. She would always say, "Oh, yeah, my cousin had the same issue, and that was that they had their kids right after that, and all of this." And so, and I'm assuming that that's accurate for her cousin as well. But like, it was not accurate for my dad. He did have that surgery, but he still did not have, from what it sounds like, any, or any viable sperm at all. He was basically completely infertile.
Right.
Yeah. So it was a very eventful, kind of eye-opening 15-minute conversation. There was a lot of questions of, why didn't you tell me? We thought it would be upsetting. What about, who is this person? We don't know. They said they were using doctors. Well, is there any information? No, they didn't give us anything. But what, I mean, really, I have an adoptee friend who loves when I tell this part of my story. But I was breastfeeding my daughter still at the time, and I was about to turn 35 in a couple weeks. I found out right before my 35th birthday. And, you know, I worked in healthcare for many years. And one of the first things that popped into my mind when I realized that, yes, indeed, I was actually Ashkenazi Jewish, and this was true. And this person who I am from is someone I don't know. One of the first thoughts was, BRCA, things like that. Grew up with many, many Jewish friends, and, had learned about some of the, health implications and various ethnic backgrounds in my work. And so, one of the first things I said to her was like, "Mommy, what about my boobs?" I was like, I'm feeding my daughter. Like, what if all this guy's sisters, if they all had breast cancer? What if I should have been having screenings already? I'm about to turn 35. Like, what if I'm at high risk and I don't know? She's like, I don't know, but they said they were all healthy. She just kept saying that. They said they were healthy. They said they were healthy doctors. I'm like, but mommy, that was 35 years ago. What if she's like, I don't know. I mean, I was just like, mommy, like, how, you didn't think any of this through, These were like my first immediate thoughts. And then the other thing that she said to me, which has always stuck with me in those first, 15 minutes, was she's sitting there crying, and she says to me, I always thought you were Jewish. And I'm like, okay. And that statement has been so, I don't want to say influential, but it's kind of been this like shroud, or this like overarching something over my story, because I, at the time, mostly felt horrified that, having been pretty recently postpartum myself and knowing what that bond was with a child, my initial was like, you carried me for 9 months and you birthed me and you raised me, and the entire time you were looking at me and trying to figure out what the hell I was. Like, what is this person? Like, that's what you can, like, is that based on your stereotypes? Is that based on what I look like? Is that based on my person? Like, what are you using to judge that? And it just made me feel like so objectified and dehumanized. And from this person who I was so close to, and just having become a mother recently myself, I'm like, how could I look at my kid that way? It was just so mind-boggling and so dehumanizing. And it's just kind of been something that's kind of been with me for the last almost 8 years. And then when I asked for any possible, who is this person? Do you have anything? Any paperwork? Anything? They had nothing. But what she did remember, which turned out to be very helpful, very useful, I had this half sister match that I matched with. And I, you know, once I found out about the sperm donor, it probably in some way must have crossed my mind, like, well, I don't know, who is she, another donor child? Is she, how is she a half sibling? And so what my mom told me was, she said she went in for 3 days, the week that she was ovulating, I don't know, like a Monday, Wednesday, Friday kind of thing or whatever. And, she said, oh, they were using doctors. They told me they were using doctors. Okay. And she said one of the days that she went in, her doctor came in with the semen sample in, a cup of some sort, I imagine. And he goes, I just drove over from Long Island with this. And, and my parents are living in Westchester, you know. So literally the first image I had in my mind was like a cup holder, like one of those solo cups, like in the cup holder, like driving across like the Throg's Neck or the Whitestone. Like, I'm like, oh, that's me in there. What? It was just very, very uh, upsetting in a very strange way. And she goes, yeah, so that's what he said. He came in, he said he just drove over from Long Island with that, like as he's getting her up to squirt it up and all of that. So, I'm like, okay. And that ended up being the clue that I needed to figure out very quickly who this match was that I matched with. Because later that evening, once the immediate dust had settled, not even close to all the dust, but just the immediate, shock of, okay, this is what the story is. I went, and thankfully, my match had her full name on there, and I Googled, and lo and behold, there were 3 doctors on Long Island with that last name of this half sibling match that I had.
Okay.
And so I figured it was a pretty good likelihood that her dad, the actual person who raised her, who was our shared biological father, I was pretty certain that he was the actual donor and that she was probably a kid that he had raised and not another donor kid.
Right.
And so I bit the bullet, and within 24 hours, just kind of thought about it. And I messaged her and I just told her exactly what had happened. I just found this out. I just, Googled your last name. It seems like maybe your dad is a doctor. And I was told that these donors may have been doctors and that, the donor may have been from Long Island. I don't want anything from you. Don't I just, if you can, I'm worried about medical history. I said, if you could, share a little bit of that. I said, if there's any, family history or any, just, where your family came from, that would be great. And I said, and of course, I'm always willing to be friendly too, if you want to just, get to know one another, anything, I'm like anything, just kind of like begging and trying to be like, I don't want anything major from you, just this basic level of information. And very, very, very grateful that she responded pretty quickly and confirmed that yes, she and her siblings had just found out maybe like 2 or 3 weeks before that their dad had donated sperm.
Wow.
Because as I found out, someone had popped up on Ancestry about 2 weeks before I did. So that poor family literally thought they were going to have people popping up every 2 weeks, and thankfully that has not happened. The two of it just so happened that one of his kids that he raised had tested on 23andMe, another one had tested on Ancestry. I don't even know that they had thought about it or consulted with each other, but it allowed for both my half brother who tested on Ancestry to find the family, and it allowed for me on 23andMe to find the family. So very quickly, she gave me the email of her older brother. He kind of became the kind of gatekeeper a little bit. I don't want to say gatekeeper because he's very sweet, very kind person, but kind of the door, holding the door a little bit for anybody who kind of came just to kind of, you know, check in, and we emailed a little bit and then we chatted on the phone and then we met one another. And I was kind of thinking, okay, maybe the fact that he is meeting me means that, he's just going to give me a little bit of, you know, he gave me some medical history and things like that. But my thought was, oh my gosh, maybe this means that his dad's not really interested. Like, they're just kind of giving me a little bit of what I need. But when we met, and I was asking him more about his dad, and, he goes, would you like me to give my dad your email address? I was like starting to tear up. I'm like, yeah, if that's okay, if he wants to. And he's like, yeah, yeah, I'm sure he'll be fine with it because, my other half brother who had popped up a couple weeks before me had also been offered, the email communication. And I didn't know yet, but that was the next step. And he was like, yeah, yeah, yeah. My dad was just on a trip or something. So we just like haven't told him that another one popped up yet, but like, yeah, he'll be fine with it. And I was like, oh my gosh. So a few days later, I got an email from my biological father, and I ended up meeting him in January. So I found out in September, met my half brother in November, and met my bio dad in January. And yeah, and I had found that there was another donor sibling. And so those first few months were wild, just wild, overwhelming amount of grief, overwhelming amount of betrayal, anger, making new connections. It was just, um, and that's kind of the groundwork for my story and how everything started. And kind of from there, things both kind of simultaneously unraveled and started to make sense, like at the same time. I fell into kind of an even worse state of depression and trauma after meeting my bio dad because of the grief, the sense of loss, the sense of missed time, the sense of all of that, the sense of seeing so much of myself in him, both in appearance and personality. The sense of, I found donor conceived right between Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, which is like the holiest time on the Jewish calendar. And I kind of was like, this means something. This is significant. And I kind of dove right into that aspect of my story as well. And it all was just beyond overwhelming, beyond traumatic, kind of gradually losing support from my family, my raised family. My mom tried to be supportive at first, um, and then kind of fell back over time into I think the old patterns of thought that they got themselves into, which was, like a year or two later, she's like, we didn't lie, like that kind of falling back into that. And it's like, oh no, we're not going back to this. Like, this is not where we're going with this.
Mm-hmm.
We're not falling back on trying to, or the kind of blaming me for discovering this and all of that. It's been a very long and slow process. Those first couple years were very, very traumatic. I started to dive into advocacy pretty soon after also, which helped a lot, but also, added another layer of stress to life. But I don't regret it because I think partly in telling my story more, in helping other people, Um, Even if it was difficult at times, I feel like it eventually led to normalizing the story for myself. It led to me processing it better, to not ignoring it like a lot of people do. They find out and then they just kind of bury it for a while. Like I didn't at all. I kept digging and digging and digging more and more into my feelings, into learning other people's stories, into figuring out what donor conception is and what it was in the early 80s and how it started and where it's going. And I threw myself into all of that. And I don't know how I got through everything, but I several years later I ended up converting to Judaism. So that became a big part of my story. I still get told by many people that how did I not know I was Jewish? Which again, like with what my mom said, it adds this crazy layer of like, did everybody know except for me? How
Right.
did everybody know? What was it about me? And it's such and it leads to this strange place when I'm in Jewish spaces now because I'm in many ways a convert, but I'm also patrilineal and I also look the part apparently. And so it leads to this weird like imposter syndrome, but not imposter syndrome. But I've always been here. This is always who I've been. Oh, this makes sense why I didn't like Catholic school. Like all these, like all these crazy things, but just kind of gelled in my life. And it's been wild, and I've extended kind of my work into the adoption world too. I started making alliances both in the adoption world and then in the general not parent expected misattributed parentage community. So I, kind of try to do a lot of work on like the parallels, the things that we share, the differences. That way we can advocate for each other better. So there's just so many like nuances and angles to what you do with this once it happens to you. And I don't regret, I don't think anything that I have done with my story because I feel like it's led me to a place where I can say that I've become more whole in the sense of having all parts of myself recognized and valued, becoming more empathetic to other people's, the differences in other people's stories, which just it helps you in life in general. It's made me a better parent, I think, because I've learned so much of what not to do as a parent from the way my parents reacted to this situation, and also looking back and finding all the ways in which this whole situation affected their parenting.
Hmm.
I feel like this turns you into like a teenager all over again, where you go through the process when you're a teenager of finding all the things that your parents are doing wrong in their parenting of you. And, those were many things I could forgive. And even in my early, 20s, kind of grappling with things, some of the trauma they had passed down or the things they had done wrong, and kind of forgiving them for that. And then learning this at 35, going back again and realizing how many of the things that they did wrong were impacted by this, you know, and realizing that they chose that. They continually chose the secret over my health, over, honesty. Like they found ways to manipulate the truth in order to hide this. Like it leaves a sour taste in your mouth regarding the relationship that a parent can have with a child. And so been a big thing that I've kind of like tried in my own way to bring forth to the next generation is heal a little bit of that. that
Hmm.
rift that I felt, while kind of maintaining some of the things I valued about the way I was raised. So it's such a complicated experience, and there's good and there's bad, and I feel like the trauma of it, like as amazing as this story has been, as much as it's added to my life, as much as I've taken this almost as like a second career kind of thing at this point, this shouldn't have happened.
Hmm.
This should not have happened the way it happened. There was no need for this to be this way. There was no need for the horrible, life-altering seismic shift that occurred, disruption, and the trauma that just doesn't go away. You're always, as much as you recover and make meaning, you're always traumatized by this. And I feel like it just sucks that this shouldn't have to happen this way. So that's kind of how
Yeah.
I base my life and my view of this, is how can I make this better so that it
Yeah.
doesn't keep happening this way for other people,
Yeah.
because it can't.
And kudos to you for doing that. I think it's a mind-boggling experience for anyone to feel like others could almost see and sense who you are more than you can see and sense who you are yourself,
Yes.
right? I've had friends who, when it came out that I'm also half Ashkenazi Jewish, where some of them have been like, I knew it. Like
Mhm.
I just could tell. And yeah, I'm not sure what to make of that either. Like, I have the same question. It's like, all right, well, what
Yeah.
is it about me? Is
Yeah.
it just my look? Are there
Yeah.
personality quirks that I have that indicate Judaism, like Jewishness? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's weird to feel like people saw that in me before I saw it myself.
It's it's very, very weird.
Yeah. Okay. I have many questions.
Yes.
I think let's start with, you said you were basically digging through all of this information almost endlessly. As you were doing that, what was your parents' perspective of, you trying to uncover more and more of this? Like, you said that your mom was supportive in the beginning, but at what point did that?
Yeah, I think, she was really happy when I found my half brothers, the one that my bio dad raised, and also the one who was donor conceived. It was, even though I had initially matched with a half sister, I ended up not hearing from her for a while. I think she just it was a lot for her. So I ended up having a relationship with these two brothers first. And I think that made her really excited. Like, I think it was really exciting for her. She looked at pictures of them and she was all like teary eyed. She's like, I feel like I love them because they look like you, they look just like you, you know. So I think that made her feel really good. Like, I think, and she knew, and even my dad admitted, he knew that I'm like a really family oriented person. Like, I'm the one who keeps in touch with like my family in Italy still, I mean, more than anybody else in my family, so, and like I connected my dad with some of like his cousins who he had lost touch with, like I found them online. I wrote them letters. I went to visit them like when my husband and I were like traveling cross country, like things like that. Like, I think they knew that I was really big on like family connections and keeping those things alive. So I think it made my mom really, really happy for me to find those connections. And then when I met my bio dad, I think she was also happy for me. The first thing she said when she saw a picture of him was, he looks so old. And I'm like, Mommy, he's like in his late 60s now, just like you are. Like, I'm sorry. Like, he's not, whatever anymore. And it actually turned out that, she was told that they were medical students. And it actually turned out that my bio dad was actually already a practicing doctor. So he was actually a bit older than what I guess they were kind of initially thinking, which was a student level, like in their 20s. He's actually even like a year older than my mom and dad. So, yeah. So, but in other words, he's pretty much the same age. So that was kind of shocking. And she also just didn't, the first thing when I showed her the picture, which took a lot for me to show her a picture of him and I together when I met him. But for her to say that as like the first thing, I was like, it just felt like she was trying to put some distance up.
Right.
This person she had tried to like imagine didn't exist for 35 years, all of a sudden, um, oh, he's old. Like, yeah, that's what happens after 35 years. And also the fact that she really tried to she didn't see any resemblance or said she didn't. You don't look that much like him." I'm really anybody else I've shown a picture, like, "Oh my god," somebody was like, "Copy paste, like, you look just like him," and especially for her to say I look so much like my half siblings too, and then kind of deny that I look anything like him. I think it felt a little too real for her. So I feel like that was one thing, even though she was happy that I found him, happy I had gotten some information. I think it was a little bit jarring in that way for her. At first, she was, I think, also really happy that I was like embracing Judaism. I think she understood that it meant a lot. And again, like my grandfather grew up, they grew up and they lived in Brooklyn for a while, many years after they came to America. And yeah, there were a lot of Italian and Jewish families next to each other. They learned a lot. They valued each other a lot. I think my mom always valued the culture and, all of that as well. So I think it made her happy, but I think it also started to like feel like it was too much, I feel like. Not from a religious perspective. It wasn't like that bothered her. I don't that she's, there was no kind of they knew I had abandoned Catholicism or any remnants of Catholicism long ago, but like I feel like it again made it a little too real for her. Like if I was lighting Hanukkah candles that first year, my friend helped me figure out how to do it, and it's like it almost probably felt like it was a little bit too real. Um, and I think she just kind of slowly started slipping back into the denial. We'd have an argument about something and she would seem to get it. And then, a few weeks later, kind of the same issue would come up and she'd kind of almost like that learning didn't happen. All the learning would kind of regress. And then I think also what started to happen was my dad started to get to her. My mom is a really, really kind person, good person. My dad also, has a good side, but he's a very troubled person. Always had a lot of issues, a lot of psychological issues, and a lot of them manifested not well, growing up. There was emotional abuse and he was a very angry person. He was a substance abuser, things like that. And so I think he, the longer it went on that I was interested in this new part of my life, I think the more comfortable it got for them because they realized things weren't going to go back quickly to the way they were. I was always going to be embracing this new stuff and having these difficult emotions. And my dad was really angry at me for finding out. Like really angry. He actually didn't care. He was great, almost, I want to say. Great is not a great word, but he understood that I wanted these connections. Again, I think he really appreciated the fact of knowing me and knowing how I value family and how I value people and value connections. And I think it made him, you know, I think he understood that that was valuable for me. So he didn't mind that I had connected with my bio dad. I wanted to tell him that and be honest with him about that. That part he was actually pretty like, oh, well, kind of like that's good kind of a thing. He was just really, really mad that I found out that this happened at all and that he was infertile. Like that was the thing. So I think he started to get more angry, more uncomfortable that this was not going away, and more kind of dragging my mom back into the denial mode of like, what's wrong with her? Why is she still talking about this? Why is she still upset about this? Why is she still involved with this? Like, and kind of bringing her back into that kind of like toxic mentality, because that's kind of who he is. He has that kind of manipulative, kind of toxic thing to him. And so I really think he kind of pulled her back into that. And then I started having more, PTSD symptoms. I, ended up in like a trauma therapy and like a intensive outpatient hospital visits, like things like that, where like my mom was like trying to help me care for my toddler, like help me with, things like that. And I think like they were resentful of the fact, or probably guilty. I'd like to think that they felt guilty, because they should, of the fact that I was like in the hospital, suicidal, like, and they had to like help me during that time. And I think they kind of, it's like, oh, well, why is she like this? It's because of us, you know? And I think they became resentful, and they really started to, my dad started telling my mom she wasn't allowed to come and watch my daughter while I went to therapy. Like, I had to switch to telehealth even before COVID. I was like
Yeah.
the first line, because like there was a certain point where my dad was like, no, I'm not allowed to go and help her anymore, watch my daughter while I went to therapy or something. So I had to do telehealth while my daughter was sleeping, kind of thing. And they
Mhm.
just kind of started to pull back any kind of support, whether it was emotional support or actual like tangible support like that. And it got like worse and worse. It got really, really ugly, because there was some other family drama involved. But it ended up where my daughter and I almost ended up not having a place to live because of them and the way they kind of tried to punish me, basically, for finding this out.
Mhm.
Like, it escalated, like it snowballed. It went from like, yes, we'll help you, we're having a hard time, we're glad you found these connections, to resentment, to why are you still talking about this, to, oh, now we're not going to come and help you babysit. Oh, and now we're kind of rescinding. I was living in a place where they were helping with the with where I was living, with a place where I was living. And
Yeah.
yeah, it just got really bad.
Got it. One more question on the note of your parents, and then
Yeah.
we'll shift away. So early on, you mentioned that when you took the test, your mom was present for that. Have you ever asked her about what her thoughts were as she watched you do that? Because she knew that the truth was coming,
She knew.
but she knew. Yeah.
She knew. Didn't I don't think I asked her about that specific moment, but I did ask her about how she felt knowing that I was doing this test. And I think her hope was that in some crazy miracle, that it would either not show anything, that I would not figure it out, or that I would somehow be my dad's child. They didn't mix sperm, uh, but they did tell them to have sex when after the insemination. And so I think they always kind of maybe hoped. My mom knew. I mean, I think basically from what she had told me about my dad's test results, like she basically knew that there was no way he was my father. But I think maybe because the doctors at the time were so kind of manipulative about that whole like, oh, if you go home and have sex, it helps push like, that
Yeah.
doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
Even my bio dad, who is retired OBGYN, who probably did his own inseminations, thankfully not with his own, no fertility fraud involved, but he was, also in that field. He even laughed when I said that. He's like, no, we knew that wasn't what was happening. We knew there was not like they weren't like piggybacking on each other. And so, yeah. But I think they kind of always maybe hoped that maybe there was some miracle where I was his child. So I think when I took the test, I think she was hoping that either that would happen or that somehow I wouldn't figure it out. It wouldn't be obvious. The test wouldn't show anything. And they were perfectly willing to continue hiding the secret, I'm sure.
Right.
Yeah.
Got it. Okay. Now, with the donor, and he has two of his own, is it a son and a daughter that he
He has
raised?
three of his own kids. Yeah.
Three. Okay.
One wants nothing to do with it. So there's really only two that I've been in touch with.
Got it. Now, one of the half siblings of yours on Ancestry, you said connected with the donor's kid
Yeah.
that he raised.
Yes.
Was that the breaking of the ice
Yes.
around all of this information? Okay.
Yep. That's
So,
that's how they found out that their dad had donated sperm. Was this person
okay.
popped up as a half sibling, and I forget whether they confronted him or but it came out that way. I think their mom knew too. He's divorced from his ex-wife, from his children's mom, but I think they were dating when he was donating, so she knew also. So they may have also just asked their mom, and she may have said it too. But yeah, they had just found out as well.
Got it. So do you have any insights from having met one of his sons that he raised into how that affected their family dynamic?
Yeah. I mean, I think they were shocked. I think they were angry as well at their dad, especially the one who wants nothing to do with us. I think he's particularly angry, but taking it out on us, which the other two haven't done. Like
Mhm.
it's not our
Yeah.
fault. But I think they were what made you think this was a good idea?
Yeah.
I mean, I know hindsight is easier to say, but did you not think when you were donating that much sperm that nothing was going to happen one of these days? We
Right.
we all grew up right outside of New York City. So far, all my other half siblings that I found, both the ones that he's raised and then the other donor siblings, so far they all grew up within, a few miles of each other on Long Island. It just so happened that, my mom's doctor also worked at Long Island Jewish. So he was sending the supply over to Westchester County. And then, when I was 2 years old, my dad got a job transfer to New Jersey. So I ended up growing up in suburban New Jersey. But otherwise, I would have grown up in Westchester, all the other siblings on Long Island. Who knows? Maybe there's a few more in Westchester. I don't know, but we're all so close. So many of us live, I'm in Jersey City now. Many of my other siblings live in the city or Long Island. We're all close by. So I think very soon his kids that he raised realized that this was a big effed up situation and that they were going to be very much affected too. And especially I think his son, as the oldest, um, is, resentful of the fact that now he has to deal with this every time and we haven't had a new sibling pop up in 5 years now. But for a while, again, my first brother and I popped up 2 weeks to about 2-ish weeks from each other. And then a couple more popped up in the next year or two. So I think they were freaking out that this was just going to keep happening, that it was going to be every few months, there was going to be another. And I'm sure there's more of us based on the age differences between us. He was donating for a few years. And so there are more of us, but I think it freaked them out how often this was going to happen, that they were going to have to go through this again, and realizing that there's siblings out there that live all close by. Our kids are the same age. I think it started to dawn on them that this was going to affect them too.
Mhm.
This was a decision that their dad made that was going to affect them intimately as well. And I think it made them mad as well, frustrated with him. But thankfully, 2 out of 3 of them have not held it against us. and have been really nice and welcoming to us. They have their own family dynamic. We don't get invited to like family get-togethers or gatherings. We're not like aunts and uncles to the kids necessarily, but that's something I've processed over the years. At this point, I'm just glad to at least be in touch and have a friendly relationship, and if more comes in the future, then that's great. But it's hard because, yeah, they have their own family dynamic already. And it's like, oh, here we are adding several more random people into it who happen to look just like us. And it's strange. I think it's strange for them too to look at us because we look just like them or like their dad.
Cut from the same cloth. So I guess in your case, unlike some of us in the DCP community, myself included, I haven't met any of the donor's kids that he raised or the donor. You have had that experience. So I'm curious, having that kind of access and being able to actually see each other in the flesh, what kind of similarities do you see when you factor in like the nature side of the equation? Like, are there things that you can look at and say, oh, we share those same interests, or hey, maybe we work in the same field? What kind of commonalities have you come
Yes.
across?
That's been enormous, and that's, I feel like, been such a layer of grieving too, is that my bio dad and I don't know, the first time I met him and someone asked me what it was like, I was like, I just met myself. Like that's what it felt like. I met somebody who was me.
Mm-hmm.
And he felt like he intuits things about me, like even just emails I would send him that would not mention anything necessarily like I don't know that you would think he would be able to like discern this from, but he would be like, I can tell that about you, or I can tell this about you, and it would be right. And it would be like things about himself that he could see elements of in me, and then he would say like, this is how you are, and I'd be like, yeah, that's how I am. Like, how did you know that? That's really, it's really weird. Like, and it's just many things like that. And again, like this whole thing makes us really like experiments into the whole nature nurture thing. So, there's been a lot of insights about that where I'm like, oh, it's totally both. Like there are totally things I get from my it's totally things I get from my raising dad, and a lot that I get from my mom, and but it's also helped me put together a lot of my personality where I'm like, "Oh, I'm a combination of these two people. I'm a combination of like my maternal grandfather and Steve, my bio dad. Like I'm a combination of like personality wise. And then looks, I'm a combination of my maternal grandmother and Steve's father or whatever. Like it's just made that make a lot of sense. But one thing that I find very kind of to illustrate that nature nurture thing was, I was a really, really shy kid, really shy. Didn't talk in class kind of thing, very reserved in that way. And, you know, it's a whole family of introverts. It's not, unusual, but my parents are kind of still that way. Like my parents never were like involved in any, you know, stuff at my school. Like they didn't really like, they weren't gregarious. They didn't really like I don't know. They're just, kind of homebody in that way, kind of, and didn't really, not really adventurous, that kind of stuff. And I don't know, once I started to hit like my 20s, I, was a little more adventurous. And there are people on my mom's side who are adventurous. It's not just, that, but, I started to kind of like certain things, more like traveling and kind of doing things that other people might think were a little crazy, like, oh, is that safe? Is that like, you're doing that by yourself? Like, this is, and then I don't know, once I hit my 30s, I really started to get more like social, a little more, I'm still an introvert at heart, but more like, like I can talk to people, like I'm a little more like what's it, an ambivert, like in social situations. I can be gregarious, I can be the, like, and it was yeah, it was kind of a departure. And I felt like that was never modeled for me as a kid, what that was like, you know? And when I met my bio dad, he was telling me about how shy he was as a kid and all of this. And then he's like, yeah, and then like in my 30s, I was a doctor and I started to, kind of come out of my shell a little bit and be more social. And now he's like the in the leadership of his like 55 and over community, and he runs like all the events for them, and like he's like super involved in like all these organizations and stuff. And he's like, yeah, it's just kind of like shifted for me, like in my, mid 30s or so, like where I just kind of, my personality kind of not changed, but kind of blossomed a little bit. And I was like, fuck yeah, that's exactly what happened to me. Like exactly. And I'm like, how did that happen? I never had that modeled for me. It was almost like I was just like, it was like a pattern where I was living in his footsteps. He'd be like, oh yeah, I'll just go into the city and I'll like go to a museum and then I'll decide I want Greek food. So I'll go to Astoria and get Greek food. And I was like, stop it. That's like what I did last weekend kind of thing, like
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
like things like that. And of course it's like, I had a friend be like, well, I do that too. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't get it. Like when you're
Yeah.
raised a certain way and you see that way in your parents, and then you kind of metamorphosize as you grow up, and you meet somebody who's like followed that same metamorphosis into those same like interests or those same like personality quirks. You're just like, what? Like, it was beyond eerie, but it also made me feel really complete and really seen. And, he just kept saying, like, I just want to help people. I've always just wanted to help people. And that's why I went into, to medicine. That's why I went into being an OBGYN. And that's why I donated sperm. And I'm like, all right, the donated sperm part, we could leave that off. But like I worked the other side. I worked in hospice for many years. And I worked in Alzheimer's care. So he was like kind of shocked. He's like, wow. He's like, I worked in, beginning of life because I wanted to see happy stuff. He's like, but you worked at the end of life. And I'm like, I don't know, but I got certain um amazing kind of perspectives on life from end of life, but I kind of we kind of geared toward these big moments in life, beginning and in medical care too, where yeah, it just really made so much of my personality kind of make sense just
Yeah.
meeting him. Yeah.
To map onto basically the same kind of trajectory
Yeah.
when, you've lived a good portion of your life without even knowing he existed is
Yeah.
pretty, there's more than just coincidence happening there for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow.
It's
Okay.
weird. It's like, we all know those people where you meet them and you feel like you've known them for a really long time, or like you have a lot of stuff in common. But what I like to say is sometimes when you're meeting like biological family, it's like that feeling, but like on steroids. It's not just like, wow, I have a lot in common with this person, or wow, I feel like I've known them forever. It's like, oh, I feel like they are me, or like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's another like layer of depth and eeriness, and like this person is like living in your body kind of feeling. It's both beautiful and terrifying and deeply upsetting at the same time, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah. Big mix of emotions for
Yeah.
sure. One last question, and then I'll let you
Yeah.
add any potential closing thoughts you might have.
Yeah.
So in terms of your advocacy on behalf of donor conceived people and kind of using your voice to sort of prop up others in the community, how does that take form in your everyday life other than, lending your story on a podcast? Are there
Yeah.
other ways that you've
Yeah, there's I feel like there's different layers. We started a New York City area meetup group for donor conceived people. So that's been something that we've had going for a few years. I've been able to make some really great friends, in the area. I spoke at a conference about, donor conception, and like one of my donor conceived friends and one of my recipient parent friends who also happened to live in Jersey City both helped me out with childcare while I was away at a conference talking about donor conception. They brought my daughter to school in the morning. My husband had to go to work, so they brought my daughter to school in the morning, like for me the couple days I was gone. Things like that, where it's been more than just this. It's been actually forming friendships and connections with people in the community, donor conceived and otherwise, parents, donors, adoptees, things like that. So there's been that. And there's been kind of the online world. I guess the biggest thing online is that I'm an admin for what's called the big group, which is the Donor Conceived Best Practices Group, which is the largest space on the internet for the entire donor conception constellation. So it's donor conceived people, parents, donors, gamete providers, mental health professionals, siblings, anybody who's connected to donor conception in some way in that group. And, we have, what is it, 30,000 now? It's a lot of people. So, I didn't start the group, but I was the first donor conceived moderator of the group and was promoted a couple years ago to admin. And so, you know, help run that with a great group of people where we, help provide support, but primarily give advice and education for people who are using gamete donors now so that their situations work out better than our situations did, and that they have more insight into what their kids may be going through. So there's that. And then there's also kind of on the larger level of, I don't work specifically with one nonprofit or another. I've kind of, volunteered with many and, done what I can with various nonprofit organizations as needed, but always have been willing to step in and, have provided testimony for legislation, the recent legislation in Colorado. I spoke there. I have my in-laws are in Colorado, so I've kind of been able to position myself as a not a Colorado resident, but I have family there voting, kind of. And so yeah, I've been able to submit testimony to work with legislators to make this issue known. I've talked with legislators here in New Jersey. Nothing ended up taking form yet, but to kind of put it on their radar. And one of the largest things that I've done um, in the last couple of years is I was on a task force with the American Society for Reproductive Medicine, ASRM. They had a task force of some of the top, people in the fertility world, mental health professionals, fertility doctors, genetic counselors, lawyers involved in donor conception. And then there were three of us on there who were donor conceived adults to create, new recommendations for ASRM for updating their guidelines around donor conception, considering the fact that, things like anonymity are not possible anymore. The fact that people are connecting with donors, people want to use known donors. People want to have sibling limits. The rise of, the large banks has resulted in dozens and dozens and hundreds of siblings. I was conceived from fresh sperm. So even though there's probably many of us and we'll never know because there were no records, but there were a few more limits to fresh sperm than there are to the way it's done now, where sperm is frozen and you can have hundreds and hundreds of siblings from the same donor. So I think, talking about those issues and how it affects us, and, being that a liaison to ASRM where we're telling them like this cannot go on this way. we are suffering the effects, and the kids being born now are suffering from the effects as well of the way the industry is now. Some things may have improved. Maybe not as many parents are lying to their kids as they were in the early 80s, but we know that parents still are lying to their kids. And we know that the way the industry has in many ways changed, but not always for the better. Yeah, parents may get a medical history now. Sure, we didn't get anything, but they may get something. But guess what? It's never updated. Guess what? Your kid may have 200 siblings. Guess what? Like, there's all these systemic issues around donor conception and things that have become problematic with the rise of it as kind of this capitalist entity of creating children. So yeah, working with ASRM has been, both challenging but also very rewarding in being able to make connections with people who are, professionals in the fertility industry who are actually working in it, who can, extend our voices and make sure that the people in leadership and the people working in this industry are aware of our issues and are becoming increasingly aware of the problems and working with us instead of against us, with working with us to create change that's going to actually benefit everybody involved, not just donor conceived people, but truly everybody involved.
Yeah. Wow. That's quite the undertaking that you've got on your lap there. Thank you for doing all of that, because it's going to take loud voices to make the differences that we all know are so necessary. And I guess I'm glad the shy version of Cassandra is maybe one that is left in the past, because
Exactly.
I think, yeah, you got to be loud and proud these days to get the change that we know is necessary to
You
actually happen.
do.
Yeah.
Exactly. And, there's always a benefit to every different kind of stage of life, and you learn something from every stage of life. And I think, I've learned from that period of my life to listen, yeah, to consider other people's feelings, even if I often put them ahead of my own. But I think it was a valuable skill, and it's given me a lot of insight into how people approach donor conception. I'm a parent after infertility as well. Like, happened naturally, but when you're going through the process, you don't know what's going to happen. You're, worried, and so I understand the feeling that a lot of people are in when they're going through this process, and being willing to listen, as uncomfortable as it may be, to recipient parents talk about their experiences. I think it's been important for, and again, same with, doctors. What are they going through when they're trying to help somebody have a child? So it's very, yeah, you're trying to gain perspective from everybody, and yet tell them that, like, all right, I hear everything you're saying and I understand you, and I'm extending myself and my understanding and my heart to you. But there is one group that's the most affected by all of this, and you really have to listen to
Hmm.
us still. And it really helps with the
Yeah.
relationships, I think, when you're willing to also be open to hearing their perspective too. But it makes for a better relationship, I think, where they can they can take you seriously when they know that you're taking them seriously. And then they can
Yeah.
realize that, yeah, we really are the most effective party. We really need to be quiet and listen to us at a certain point.
Yeah. I couldn't agree more. And I think it's super helpful to, when you're presenting a case on behalf of a big group, to show that you've thought about every angle, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's not like we're not considering all the parties involved here.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Thank you again for being at the forefront of the big change that is happening now, and it'll continue to get better, I suspect. Any other closing thoughts that you might have that maybe we haven't covered? I know
Turn on
we've
the light.
touched on a lot in this one.
I don't know. I know. Yeah. Closing thoughts. I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's like an unlimited amount of stuff to say. As my daughter says, I could yap about this forever, but 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 yet I feel like, when people say, like, everything has changed and nothing has changed, kind of, and so it's kind of that, like, you could say so much about this experience. You could, it's my next undertaking is hopefully, knock on wood, to write a book. I've been told many times you should write a book. Okay, well, you know what? Maybe I'm going to do that. And that's kind
Yeah.
of that's kind of my undertaking. We have a surprise late in life, a baby on the way, and so that's kind of my hope while I'm in the newborn stage is during those naps is kind of start to get a little bit of a start on writing my story, maybe putting a kind of a memoir together.
think
Yeah.
I think you should definitely do that. And that's one of the few things that I can say I have actually done. So I'm a living testament to, being someone who never saw writing a book on his radar. And then all of a sudden this crazy thing happened to me. And what do you know? Now I'm literally a published author. So
It's amazing.
there's definitely not on my bingo card of life, but
Yes.
I'm thrilled that it happened. And it's actually what opened the door to this podcast existing. Is I wrote the book and I thought, you know what? My story is out there. I think other people's stories should be out there too.
Yes.
So that's kind of what birthed this whole podcast thing that we're doing right now.
That's amazing. Oh, that's so amazing. And it helps, right? It helps so much to process your own story, writing it out, considering everything, exploring your own experience, and then extending that exploration to other people. That's just beautiful. And that's such a beautiful way to make sense of all of this.
Totally. So yeah, if you ever have questions about how to go about
Okay.
doing that and putting a book out there, please reach out to
Yes.
me. I would be more than happy to help.
I really
Because
do. All
it
those
was,
things, all those little details get me down. I've even been to one of the conferences I went to, I went to how to publish your story. And I'm like, yeah, but I have so many little questions.
yeah. Yeah. Well, you can definitely do it. Your story is a very fascinating one. And I think everybody in the DCP community can write a book if they really wanted to.
Yes. Just when I think
Cool.
sometimes, just when I think I have heard the most shocking thing and I can't be shocked anymore by people's stories. Someone will post in the group or I'll meet somebody, at a gathering somewhere or at a conference and they'll tell me their story and I'll be like, nope, I'm shocked. I'm shocked again.
Yep.
That is unbelievable. And yeah, I feel like everybody has some of those elements to their story where it's like this is stranger, yeah, truth is stranger than fiction kind of thing.
Go